Scientists today can tell precisely when they arrived and from where. All native peoples in South and North America belong to a racial type known as Mongoloid. They're descended from the ancient peoples of Siberia. During the Ice Age, 12,000 years ago, there was a land bridge between Siberia and Alaska. Mongoloid peoples were the first to enter the New World, or so experts thought. The Brazilian finds point to a very different story of the discovery of the Americas. The paintings on these rock shelters are much older than the Indians. Here, hunters chased giant armadillos, an animal that flourished during the Ice Age long before the arrival of the Indians. There's a playful feel to many of the scenes. Here, a group of men are standing on each other's shoulders, just like a circus act. And here, a rare romantic moment. The Brazilian finds show that the New World was discovered tens of thousands of years earlier than previously believed, certainly well before the time of the American Indians. But who were these pioneers? A much earlier wave of Mongoloids, or another race altogether? Clues to the identity of the first Americans are emerging in rock shelters in the northeast and southeast of Brazil. Archaeologists there have recently unearthed human remains. Prehistoric skulls were found buried in layers of soil 9,000 to 12,000 years old. They are the oldest skulls in the Americas. And this is the oldest of them all. The skull of a young woman nicknamed Luthia by scientists. Can she tell us who the first Americans were? Walter Neves is a physical anthropologist at Sao Paulo University in Brazil. He's been using a standard and reliable archaeological measure, the shape of the skull, to find out what race she belonged to.
91.
He fully expected Luthia to be a Mongoloid, an ancestor of the American Indians.
91.
But then he fed the measurements into the computer.
When we start running the computer and seeing the results, it was amazing because we realized that the statistics, the quantitative analysis we were doing was not showing just people to be Mongoloid. In fact, the analysis was showing these people was anything except Mongoloid.
So who was Luthia? And where did she come from? To find out, the skull was taken to a hospital in Rio de Janeiro to begin the process of reconstructing her face. The first stage was to make a three-dimensional CAT scan of Luthia's skull in order to build a replica. bust was then given to Richard Neve of the University of Manchester in England, one of the world's leading forensic artists, to recreate her features.
That to me is a Negroid face that has all the features that you associate with a Negroid face. The proportions of the face, it doesn't say anything about it being Mongoloid.
Luthia belongs to a race found historically along the rim of the Indian Ocean, in East Africa, in the islands of South Asia, and in Australia and Melanesia. Was this then the face of a first American? Her reconstruction is confirmed by measurements Walter Nevis has taken of all his skulls.
The first reaction was not to believe in it. But as the results, repeated so many times, and the result is exactly the same thing. They are very similar to nowadays Aborigines and Africans, and no similarity at all with Mongoloids in Asia or with American Indians.
We starting off with this study from PubMed Central. Genetic studies have been consistent with a single common origin of Native American groups from Central and South America. However, some morphological studies have suggested a more complex picture, whereby the Northeast Asian affinities of present-day Native Americans contrast with a distinctive morphology seen in some of the earliest American skeletons, which share traits with present-day Australasians, which is indigenous groups in Australia, Melanesia, and island Southeast Asia. It goes on to say that Amazonian Native Americans partly descend from a Native American population that carry ancestry more closely related to indigenous Australians, New Guineans, and Andaman Islanders than to any present-day Eurasian or Native American, which is further saying that current Native Americans do not resemble their so-called ancestors. This is an article from the National Geographic. This will corroborate what we just read. The oldest complete skeleton of its kind ever found, dating to more than 12,000 years ago, is helping solve a mystery about the differences in body types between the first humans to arrive in the Americas and later Native Americans, scientists announced Thursday. We know we didn't arrive here. We've always been here, but we're gonna keep going. Anthropologists have long puzzled over why Native Americans don't look more like their ancient ancestors who migrated into the Americas during the Pleistocene, the epoch that encompassed the last ice age and that ended about 12,000 years ago. And this article is from 2014. Anthropologists at this time were questioning why Native Americans don't look like their so-called ancestors. I will also be showing that they couldn't have migrated into the Americas about that time ago because there was an ice wall in the Yukon territory blocking passage. But we'll get to that. The ancient skulls are larger, their faces are narrower and more forward projecting, and they more closely resemble native peoples of Africa, Australia, and the southern Pacific Rim than they do their supposed American descendants. They tell you right now, the first Americans resembled the native peoples of Africa and Australia and the southern Pacific Rim more than they do the current day Native Americans, meaning they were so-called Negroid and not Mongoloid. The skeleton, dubbed Naya by her discoverers, belonged to a teenage girl who fell more than 100 feet to her death nearly a half-mile inside an elaborate network of karst caves that were largely dry at the end of the Pleistocene. Divers who found Naya in a cave on Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula named her watery grave Hoyo Negro, which translates to black hole in Spanish. Chatters described Naya's face as narrow with wide set eyes and a low, prominent forehead, a low, flat nose, and outward projecting teeth, about the opposite of what Native Americans look like today. Genetic analysis of modern Native Americans indicate they descend from a founding population that originated in Asia. They were isolated from other population groups for several thousand years, somewhere in or near the region known as Beringia, a broad swath of land that reached from Siberia to Alaska during the last glacial maximum. So that's telling you, when the ancestors of current-day Native Americans did try to come over to the Americas, they were unable to do so because the area known as Beringia was iced over, meaning their passage was being blocked.
If the ancestors of the Aborigines did reach South America by chance, they would have been the first people to settle the New World. They would have become the American Aborigines. But if this is what happened, where are their descendants? Why are there none of these American Aborigines in North and South America today? One possibility is that for a long time they lived alone in the continent, leading an idyllic life, free from invaders. After all, the land route from Asia into North America remained firmly blocked for thousands of years. But around 14,000 years ago, the climate began to warm up.
We on the Canadian Museum of History website. At the height of the last ice age, glacial ice covered nearly all of Canada and much of Europe and Asia. With much of the Earth's water locked up in ice, sea levels were lowered worldwide by 100 meters. This exposed shallow seabeds off the east coast of North America, as well as a land bridge between Alaska and Siberia in the heart of a region known as Beringia. Beringia remained free of ice because the climate was very dry. Archaeological evidence suggests that people had spread across Beringia from northeastern Asia into unglaciated portions of Alaska and the Yukon Territory sometime before 18,000 years ago. People may have also been living elsewhere in North America south of the glacial ice at this time, an issue that continues to be hotly debated by archaeologists today. So let's get this straight. The ancestors of current-day Native Americans traveled from northeastern Asia to the Yukon Territory sometime about 18,000 years ago, which was covered in ice then, and they couldn't have made it into North America until about after 12,000 years ago. But then at that time, and before that time, people were living south of the glacial ice, but yet Native Americans still get called the descendants of the first Americans. Honestly, the math just not math.
In Alaska, an ice corridor opened up. Animals took advantage and crossed through. Chasing them were Mongoloid hunters. It's well known that around 12,000 years ago, the ancestors of today's American Indians entered the New World. The Mongoloids moved swiftly, colonizing North and South America in just a few thousand years. That's precisely the time frame when scientists believe the American Aborigines begin to disappear. Could the Mongoloids have replaced the Aborigines?